G'day and welcome to the Off-Chain Podcast. Don here with you. Our guest today is Alexei Zamyatin, the co-founder of Bob, Build on Bitcoin. Was a UCL researcher and BCG advisor. Alexei is a core contributor to BitVM, and we're excited to talk with him about how BTC can power DeFi, the technical breakthroughs needed to achieve scalable Bitcoin L2s, and how we expand BTC liquid staking. Let's dive in. Tell us about your origin story. How did you get interested in building on Bitcoin?
Cool. So, I got into crypto and specifically Bitcoin by coincidence. I think that's the case for many people. So I'm a computer scientist by trade. I was always very interested in IT security, but I also pursued, in parallel to a bachelor's degree, I pursued an economics degree for whatever reason. I thought it was a good idea to also study economics, took a few courses there. So one could kind of spin a story that it was natural for me to get excited about Bitcoin, given it's on the intersection. Realistically speaking, I was looking into I was doing a bachelor's thesis. Initially, the topic should have been obfuscating Tor traffic, making it look as if you're using Skype, so your internet service provider can detect you. Wow. And my supervisor was also offering Bitcoin topics, and he said, "Well, look, they're kind of similar. You should look at this as well." And I really got excited about not just Bitcoin, but Namecoin. So Namecoin was the first altcoin. It was, there to create a better internet, decentralized DNS. And I got really excited about censorship resistance. And that's kind of how I got involved. And then it's been a 10-year long random walk a bit for like the first 7 years in research. Looked at payment channels, wrote the first research paper on merge mining, spent a lot of time trying to build Bitcoin bridges and sidechains and essentially allow people to use Bitcoin in DeFi without trusting third parties. And that also ultimately led me to getting to know my co-founder. We're the first two PhD candidates to focus on blockchain research topics at Imperial College in London. And we were always very excited about building these things. And, not just stop at publishing a paper and then you're done, but actually building it in production. So we also call ourselves recovering academics, because I felt that academia at some point was becoming more bureaucratic than anything else. And so, that's how we started the company. It's been 5 years now. We started building Bitcoin bridges for big L1s, worked with some of the biggest blockchains in the world, also worked with Marathon Digital, and now essentially Bob is our flagship product where we're trying to essentially unify the best of Bitcoin and Ethereum.
So, for our audience, explain in terms that maybe someone who's not particularly across cryptocurrencies or blockchain technology, what is BitVM and why do we need this to enable Bob?
So BitVM is a way to execute programs on Bitcoin. But the problem of Bitcoin is that, it's quite limited in what you can do there. So you can do payments, and you can specify some simple condition for these payments. But if you want to do smart contract, right, so really run programs and do more complex things like trading, lending, and so on, doesn't really work. And that's where Ethereum obviously shines because it's built for that. And Solana, you can really build anything you like. Now, what many people don't know is that Bitcoin actually does support programming. It's just very basic. And the thing to kind of imagine here, to visualize this, in Ethereum, right, you have a higher level programming language. So you can just, if you want to multiply two numbers, you just say, I'm multiplying A times B. That's it. You don't even think about, there's a multiplication function. That's it. You don't really think about, how do I build a multiplication, right? Everybody who's ever written code, we just use multiplication. Now in Bitcoin, we don't have multiplication as a tool. So you have to build it yourself. So you can imagine is basically you're building logical gates to that's oversimplified, but you kind of building your multiplication function. And you have to do this for the majority of things that are just necessary for programming. So Bitcoin can do universal computation, but something that's 5 lines of code in Ethereum and Solidity, right, could be 1,000 lines of code in Bitcoin. And that's where the problems arise because Bitcoin has limited space per block. So essentially, if your program becomes so big that you cannot fit it into a 4 megabyte Bitcoin block, you're done. You cannot run it on Bitcoin. You can try splitting it up, but usually it just doesn't work. And what we now have two options if you want to run more advanced programs, right? We can either add more functionality to Bitcoin, and there is a whole debate about adding additional opcodes, right? You surely heard about opcat and like this whole debate about, upgrading Bitcoin, but we all know how difficult that is and how unlikely it is to happen and how conservative we are, rightfully so, right? So the alternative is BitVM. The idea of BitVM is that we take the program, we run it off chain. I commit to what I'm supposed to run up front. So I'm committing to you on chain. I post some data and say, look, I'm going to run this program off chain and I'm just going to give you the result. And you can also verify on your computer, and everybody else could verify it because you know what the program is. And if my result that I commit to the public on Bitcoin is wrong, you can challenge me. And I will make it easy for you to challenge me and disprove my results. So the idea is it's optimistic computation. I run it offline, and then I post the result, and then I give you a way to challenge me if I'm trying to cheat. And so what BitVM does is it takes this big program and it chunks it up into smaller parts. Right? So each of these parts is at most 4 megabytes in size, so I could fit it into the block. So using multiplication as example, imagine it this way. Instead of having a full program that is does the whole multiplication thing, we split it up into additions. So let's say we're trying to multiply 2 times 10. So what we do is we basically say 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, and each of these programs is very, very simple, and it actually can fit into a Bitcoin transaction. Now, again, if I execute them all one by one, I get the same result. We still can't do that on chain. It's too expensive. It doesn't really fit into the block. So what I do is I commit to this program. I use this typical commitment structures that you do in blockchains using Merkle trees and hashes. And essentially now you know that, okay, I'm going to really run this program, not any other program. You know exactly that if I come back to you and say, look, here's a full program and I changed it, you know it's different to what we agreed on. And then I run it and I post the result. And let's say I'm claiming that 2 times 10 is 19, which is obviously wrong. You can easily verify that. But I'm putting it on the chain, and everybody else who doesn't want to run the program on the local machines will believe me, right? So the idea is, of course, we don't use this for multiplication, but for rather complex things like bridging and roll-ups. But, assuming multiplication is something everybody really wants us to do, I've posted the result. And now you know that this is wrong because you're running this on your local computer. You can clearly see that, no, Alexei is lying. And then what you'll do is you'll challenge me. You'll make a Bitcoin transaction and you'll say, this is wrong. I'm challenging you. And then I have a few days or a few hours, whatever, to respond to you. And what I have to do is I have to post these intermediary results of these programs. So instead of just saying the result is 19, I have to show you how I came to that result. So I'm forced to reveal, okay, we start with 0, we add 2, then it's 2. We add another 2, then it's 4. Another 2, then it's 6. And ultimately, I have to give you all the results up until ideally 20. Now, if I say 4 plus 2 is 5, obviously you'll see that that's wrong, right? You have the data on Bitcoin, you know exactly, oh, wait a second. At that step, Alexei cheated. He's trying to do something else. And then the only thing you have to do is you basically take that piece of the program, and that's the one you run in the Bitcoin transaction. So you basically only need to do 2 Bitcoin transactions. One to challenge me, I have to reply. And then you know exactly which part of the program did I modify to try to give you a wrong result. And then you can challenge me, prove that I was lying, and this way enforce that I actually cannot benefit from cheating. So the idea of this concept is that we use it for creating layer 2s on Bitcoin. So it's quite a big jump from multiplication to layer 2s. But the idea is that, look, we cannot do DeFi, trading, lending, all these cool applications on Bitcoin itself. So we do them on other chains, layer 2s that, for example, can have the same functionality as an Ethereum, but we want to make sure that they have Bitcoin security and that we can easily bridge Bitcoin in and out in a trust minimized manner. And what we essentially do is we run these computations in BitVM. So if you're running it off chain, and then we'll commit to the results, and anyone can run the same thing on their computer, just like you run an Ethereum full node. And you'll see that if we were cheating, like you're trying to withdraw Bitcoin from that layer 2, and I'm not giving it to you, or I'm giving it to somebody else, because the rules are very clear. The person who was initiating the withdrawal should be the one to get it on Bitcoin. We can all verify that. and you'll be able to prevent me from cheating. You'll be able to prevent me from stealing your Bitcoin, sending it to somebody else. So that's essentially the idea. So if we zoom out, what BitVM essentially is, it's a way for us to run more complex programs on Bitcoin, but specifically it allows us to create layer 2 solutions that are trust minimized and allow us to scale Bitcoin and add additional functionality with Bitcoin security without changing the Bitcoin code as it is today. And those who are slightly familiar with the blockchain space, think of it as we can build an Arbitrum and Optimism, a base equivalent on Ethereum, but we do this directly on Bitcoin. And why this is so important is that for Ethereum, these layer 2 solutions are just meant for scalability, right? So you can do more transactions, it's cheaper, but you can do the same thing as you're doing on Ethereum already. You have all the same smart contracts. For Bitcoin, this means not just cheaper transactions, it means powerful, useful transactions. You can do all the trading, the lending, the payments, the more advanced use cases in a decentralized manner, rather than always being forced to go to a centralized exchange, because that is the case today. And that's also what kind of, has kept me working on Bitcoin for the last 10 years. I just can't get over the fact that, Bitcoin was created to, revolutionize the financial system. But if you want to do anything more than payments, you have to go back to a centralized provider. And with BitVM and these layer 2 solutions, we can finally solve that.
Do you think there's room for BitVM and the Ethereum, like EVM, Solana, or is, with all the liquidity and just the preeminence of Bitcoin, and even in if you consider the geopolitical sphere at the moment, really people are talking about Bitcoin. Governments are talking about Bitcoin. Companies are accumulating Bitcoin, and they might be adding other things to the balance sheet. But do you think that BitVM and people building on Bitcoin, do you think this is going to be the end of Ethereum? There might be a long tail still, or is this just another part of the wider ecosystem?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, our bet is honestly that I don't think Ethereum or Solana are going away. I do believe that there will be multiple chains for different reasons. They will be specialized in certain use cases. They'll be specialized in certain geographical locations, just like there is multiple cloud providers or multiple car manufacturers, right? There will be multiple systems. There will be a winner, and that will be Bitcoin. It is already the biggest one, right? Ethereum tried to challenge Bitcoin as money. It failed. But Bitcoin lost to Ethereum on the computational side. And what we are doing with these layer 2s, we're saying, well, okay, the money can now also be programmable. So Ethereum loses its edge. It will still exist. It has a lot, and you have to also be very honest about where this research actually comes from. A lot of the techniques and tools that are used in this design come from Ethereum land, because that's where they were developed. That's where layer 2s are coming from. So I don't think that it'll be like, oh, we have Bitcoin layer 2s, now Ethereum and Solana are gone. No, it just adds competition. It will force Ethereum to innovate faster. And again, Ethereum might introduce more hard forks, more additional changes to its layer 1 to be more friendly to these layer 2s, whereas Bitcoin will be slow. So I think what it does, it heats up the race. And now suddenly Bitcoin is bigger and meaner, and actually is not just money and this rock where, you can buy it, you can hold it, you can send it. But now it's like, what? We're also going to do computation. Now we can do everything on Bitcoin. And now Ethereum has to give you a reason to go to Ethereum or Solana, right? There has to be a very strong reason in UX and product, which I think is good because it will drive competition, and it will improve the products. And honestly, Web3 products today, the UX is still pretty terrible. We're getting there, but I think we need to onboard more users, more retail users. And that's what Bitcoin can do, because Bitcoin already has 200-300 million holders that cannot do anything with it. The interesting part here, because you asked about BitVM versus EVM or SVM, the interesting part is BitVM is actually not the virtual machine. The name might be a bit misleading. BitVM is just a tool to do fraud proofs, right? This optimistic verification of programs. So what we actually do at Bob is we take the EVM and we use that with BitVM. So we actually use the EVM with the tooling that you have to do on Ethereum to onboard existing builders, to make it easy for new teams and existing institutions to work with this, rather than reinventing a completely new stack. Because there's one thing we learned from Lightning Network and also other ecosystems that try to challenge Ethereum, right? There's so many altcoins, alt L1s, that try to introduce new technologies like, Cardano, Polkadot, Cosmos. they all had different stacks, and what they all struggle with is infrastructure. And Solana is the only one that managed to execute on the infrastructure and product side well enough to start competing with ETH. And for us on the Bitcoin land, right now, if you look at UX and dev tooling, like Ethereum's up there, Solana is up close, and Bitcoin's down there. You just can't even see it. Like Bitcoin has no dev tooling. You cannot do anything. So the first step of these layer twos is to level the playing field. And that's what we actually did at Bob, right? There is today no difference between building an app on Bob or on Base or on Optimism. It's the same dev tooling, same infrastructure. You can just go and start. And then the distinction we then have is, well, look, you have all sorts of Bitcoin tooling in addition. You have all these cool things that allow you to interact with Bitcoin. And look, we're also building all of these cool security protocols that will make it even more secure for you to use Bitcoin in this ecosystem. And I think that is what makes this a bit of an unfair advantage, because EVM is there, SVM is there, it's all there, right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but then coming from Bitcoin and having this access to this huge network of users and building products for these users and specializing it, I think that gives Bitcoin Layer 2s a massive advantage over ETH and Solana. They're talking to different communities. Solana is winning right now because they're managing to onboard retail, right, through meme coins, and it's a hot narrative, and they were faster to move. But still, that user base is a tiny, tiny fraction of the Bitcoin holders worldwide. In fact, I would argue almost every single Solana user has Bitcoin. Almost every single ETH user has Bitcoin. So essentially, for a product or a chain like Bob, almost everyone becomes a potential user. And in fact, when we start building products, our first target are users that already use DeFi and want to use Bitcoin in DeFi, because they already know DeFi. They already know how these protocols work. It's much easier to sell them on this and educate them, because they just want to use Bitcoin in a more secure way. While we gradually work with third-party providers, front ends, wallets to onboard retail users. And that's where the UX is a big to do. And that's again why we, for example, use the EVM, and actually most Bitcoin-focused layer 2 projects also use the EVM, just to kind of remove that additional hurdle and be able to focus on improving the UX on the Bitcoin side. So as you can see, there's lots of pragmatism here versus just saying, oh, Bitcoin's better than everything else.
Sure. Yeah, man. So in terms of functionality, you're saying like the L2 functionality, Bitcoin has everything that it needs to build DeFi financial instruments. It just needs builders to come in and actually make it. You've got potential customers already, people who want to use it, who own and are keen to, they don't want to sell their Bitcoin, but they want to put it to work. So, you have a massive user base, massive liquidity, and now you're saying you've got the functionality, just need people to actually build those instruments? Or is there anything still, are there any pieces of the puzzle still remaining before that can actually happen?
Well, I mean, I think it's quite important to distinguish between what's already there and what is in development, right? So BitVM is still in testnet phase. It's not yet on mainnet. And we have to be quite realistic. Bitcoin DeFi today, it already exists. It's a very big market. I think it's $15 to $20 billion in size. That's how much Bitcoin has been wrapped to other networks. That is a pretty big market. If you're a startup and you're going for a $20 billion market, that's a good starting point. It's just that Bitcoin is a $2 trillion market, right? So there is just a bigger pie. If you crack this BitVM and like the security part. So what we've been doing on our side is essentially splitting our resources between two things. Tech and engineering works on better security on BitVM and essentially making sure that we can bring in Bitcoin security to the layer 2 and have secure deposits. This is currently on testnet stage, and we expect the mainnet for this to roll out throughout 2025. But one thing we also learned from the past is that trust is perceived, right? How many people actually know how these rollups work in practice? How many people know that BitVM is really safe and can verify it? So it will take time to build a bigger community around it, have more developers, more builders, more auditors, more companies start using it for the public to then perceive BitVM as secure. Even though the tech may be much, much better than centralized solutions, it'll take time. And that's where you see like the difference between technical risk and like centralization risk. Initially, the technical risk will be perceived as higher because it's new tech and nobody knows like how it works, and it needs to prove itself. And that can only happen if we build liquidity, build deposits over time, more and more users come on board. And think about it this way. If you're a big fund, you're deploying $100 million worth of Bitcoin, and you see that BitVM has had 10 million in deposits, you're not going to put in 100 million. If you see that it had 300 million for a year, okay, you might consider starting to put some of your assets and migrate over from the centralized solutions. Mm-hmm. And so today, that's the other side of our kind of work is a product side. Okay, how do we start working with the existing solutions, build new exciting products, make it super easy for users to onboard from Bitcoin layer 1 into these different Bitcoin wrappers? They're all centralized, realistically speaking, but the majority of them have big institutional custodians behind them. That's where all the Bitcoin is sitting today. People trust these custodians because, well, they know who the founders are, or they know that there's insurance, they have a license, they trust the business. And that's where the perceived trust comes in, right? If these custodians gradually, and these big players gradually start using these newer technologies, that's how you can accelerate this transition period. For like listeners, I guess, I'm sure there's a few people using institutional custodians, and then the question that I would always ask is, do you know what MPC protocol they use, your custodian uses, in the background to secure your Bitcoin? Probably not. You probably don't care. You just trust that the business works. Well, that's the same for BitVM. That's why, if you get businesses to adopt this, it makes it much easier for you to trust that, yeah, the technology is mature. And that's what the other side of our business is all about. It's like building products that anticipate this technology maturing, allow you to use Bitcoin today, and educate you about the risks that, look, today this is secured by multisigs, and there's a multi-signature there. It could be broken. It's quite unlikely, to be fair, because these are trusted businesses. But look, eventually there's this clear path to, we'll have this solution for you if you really are concerned about the custody risk. Right, here's an alternative. Try it out with maybe some of your Bitcoin. Don't put everything in, and then gradually get used to it. But then we hide everything, all the bridging, all this complexity of like understanding, like where do I click, all these different interfaces. We had just hide it behind one nice, simple interface. And like, okay, no matter which solution you're going to use, in fact, no matter what you want to do with your Bitcoin, whether you're just wrapping it and selling it, or you're taking out a loan, or you're going leverage, or you're doing something even more crazy, it's one transaction. So that's something that we've actually built. We call it Bob Stake. And it's a system that allows you to go from Bitcoin into a variety, dozens and dozens of different Bitcoin strategies that use different wrapped assets, different kind of routes and different products. But for you as a user, it's only one transaction. And what we then do is we work with wallets, staking providers, custodians to help them onboard into these new strategies. But they don't have to deal with like 50 of them. They just have to integrate one thing and they get access to everything. So it's like an aggregator. And so you can see these are quite different things that run in parallel, but they ultimately kind of come together in that once you have more people that are comfortable to use Bitcoin, they're aware of the risks. And then you have a better technical solution that just comes in the background and it's the same UX. They don't have to change what they're doing. They just can switch to better security. It's much easier to complete that transition.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. Are you also working towards, aggregating across, say, to EVM or Solana, or is it really only in the Bitcoin ecosystem?
So that's actually a very interesting question because Bob is not just a Bitcoin layer 2. We're something called a hybrid. So this is a new type of chain that inherits security from Bitcoin, but has the ability to connect natively without using any third-party bridges. Mm-hmm. So we can natively connect to Ethereum, to Solana, to any of these newer networks that have smart contracts. And the idea behind this is, our bet is, look, everybody trusts Bitcoin, right? Whether you're an ETH maxi, whether you're Solana maxi, we can all agree that Bitcoin is secure, right? Every day we go to work in the space, we assume that Bitcoin works. If Bitcoin fails, if it breaks,
we're done.
There's not going to be much left after that.
Yeah.
And so the idea is, and the other side of this, on the coin here is, well, look, Bitcoin is very simple. It cannot do much, right? But this also means it's very easy to verify that a certain transaction happened on Bitcoin. And so what we do with Bob is we inherit Bitcoin security, and you can then, looking just at Bitcoin, verify that, hey, the Bob chain at block 100,000, it's actually secure. It's been confirmed on Bitcoin. People have verified this. We're good to go. And there's, of course, some additional assumptions where like, okay, someone had to be online to do a challenge if something was wrong, right? But generally, this is like a very good security assumption. So you just need to rely really on Bitcoin at the end of the day. Now, you can do this from within Ethereum. From within an Ethereum smart contract, Ethereum can check, has Bob actually finalized? Is Bob secure at block 10,000, 100,000? Or could it be forked and rolled back? And the cool thing is, since you can do this from within Ethereum, from within Solana, from Cardano, from Polkadot, Cosmos, any chain that has smart contracts can easily verify Bitcoin. These tools already exist. Most of these chains already have this live. They're just used for other things. And the beautiful thing here is, since Bitcoin is so simple and everybody trusts it, we can allow you to bridge assets from and to Bob without introducing trust in third-party bridges. So instead of creating, and I know there's many interoperability projects, and to be fair, we work with many of them right now because they provide better UX, better speed. But our vision is that instead of introducing another network, another chain that tries to tell you, oh, you want to connect these two blockchains, let me build another blockchain that kind of does that for you. Would you say use Bitcoin? It's already there. Everybody trusts it. And we have a way for you to say, okay, I want to swap my BNB tokens for my ETH tokens. I can go to Binance and the exchange and do that there. Or I go to Bob and I swap it and I withdraw to ETH. But I've only trusted Bitcoin throughout the process. I didn't trust anyone on a centralized exchange. And vice versa, this means we can also allow Bitcoin holders to deploy their BTC into these other networks. Of course, you then trust Ethereum. If I'm moving my Bitcoin that I minted using BitVM to Bob and then I move it to Ethereum, I trust that Ethereum works. Sure, otherwise I wouldn't be using it. But again, I don't need to trust any additional bridging providers. I just trust that Bitcoin works and that Ethereum works. And that might seem not such a big difference, but it actually is a very, very big difference for the end user. Because if you look at the history of blockchains, one of the biggest vulnerabilities they've always had were bridges.
Yep.
That's the things that get hacked. And if we can solve that and use Bitcoin security to replace these risks, we can change how Bitcoin is used today. Instead of wrapping it and spreading it and fragmenting it across dozens of different providers, you use Bitcoin security. You have a central hub, that will be Bob or anybody else that builds something similar. And you can just use Bitcoin on Ethereum, on Solana, on BNB chain, borrow, earn yield on it. And you don't need a third-party bridge provider that could fail because you trust that, okay, Bitcoin is going to keep this secure. I mean, this is, of course, oversimplified. And yes, there's always some like trade-offs to be made here, but that's the vision. Like, place Bitcoin at the center of DeFi and place it at the center of cross-chain community, cross-chain bridges, essentially.
So thinking about the rollout of that vision or the realization of that vision, how's it going in 2025 and how far away is Bob from on-chain DeFi and these other things that you've been talking about?
So we're rolling this out in 3 phases. And phase 1 was bootstrapping, starting with, yes, not much Bitcoin security, essentially being connected to Ethereum, just focusing on building infrastructure, working with what's already there, working with Bitcoin projects that want to build these things. And then in parallel, start adding this security. So we're actually rolling out Bitcoin security on testnet throughout the next few months. And then it will go to audit. And here we're working actually with Babylon, who is a provider for Bitcoin security, actually. And that again accelerates the timelines because it's not just us working, but there's actually a whole ecosystem that is working on BitVM, that's working on Bitcoin security. And that actually makes it faster. So I'm quite confident that within 2025, we'll already have this first step where you can say, okay, Bob has Bitcoin security, and then I can bridge to ETH using Bitcoin security, and then we can start adding more and more networks. So towards the end of the year, we should definitely have one chain connected, being Bitcoin, Bob, ETH. But I think we might be able to do more because the cool thing is, if you look at the alternative layer ones out there, the majority of them is actually EVM based. The majority is very similar. So it should be quite easy to start with Ethereum and then start adding more as there is demand. Because also, let's be honest, Bitcoin and ETH are 90% of the market, and then you have Solana. And then you get Tron, BNB chain, which are also very big, but then it gets really sparse. So that's where we stand right now. And because BitVM is an open source effort, and also this Bitcoin security research and development is also open source, and there's actually not just Bob, but there's a bunch of other teams contributing. And yes, everybody's building their own use case. We're sometimes competing, but at the end of the day, we all need this to work. That's how I think, and actually I've seen already, Bitcoin rollups and L2s move faster from theory to production than ETH has been. It took Ethereum 5 years to get from idea to first rollups. Bitcoin is going to do it in half the time, if not faster. A, because there's a lot of stuff already there, and B, because it's started as an open source research effort and everybody is jumping on it now. Like, we have this Bitcoin renaissance happening, and the more teams build, the faster, the more competition, and the faster innovation can progress.
So if you zoom out a little bit from what you're building, what are some of the things that you're most excited about for the rest of this year, for example?
Well, I mean, the first thing would be, and I'm asked this a lot of times when I talk to people, and then they would say, well, what are the cool new things that people can build on Bitcoin that they can't build on Ethereum? And that's the wrong answer, right? Like, that's the wrong question. Right now, if you look at Bitcoin today, you just can't build anything that is even close to that of like what you can on Ethereum. So the first step is saying you can do everything that you can do in Ethereum, but with Bitcoin in a secure manner without having to leave Bitcoin. If we can do that, then we level the playing field on the technical side, on the dev tooling side, on what you can build. And that's when, so basically think about bootstrapping by leveling the playing field, bootstrap from Ethereum, if you want to say that way. And then you scale using Bitcoin, because what Bitcoin has is a massive community, hundreds of millions of users worldwide. Everybody talks about it. Institutions are using it. Businesses are using it. So you get access to so much more distribution. And now you have these builders that would have to choose, okay, I want to do something with Bitcoin, but now I don't have to go to Ethereum. I can go to Bitcoin. I can stay within this ecosystem. And this will take time, but we already see a massive inflow of builders from that come into the space and are sticking on Bitcoin. They're sticking around Bitcoin for the first time in a decade, basically, because they used to just leave. And now you see a lot of ETH, Solana builders coming back. I'm like, oh, I have a product. I can actually deploy this here, and I can get better access to Bitcoin liquidity, more users, more exposure, and actually work within this massive ecosystem that is just the biggest one out there. So the things that I'm really excited about is getting to a point where new startups that want to build in crypto don't always go to ETH, but they actually start building on Bitcoin. That becomes the number one choice. And in terms of use cases, I mean, I think there's kind of two directions. There is yield on Bitcoin, because people love yield, right? Whether it's on cash, on stable coins, people want to have passive income. You have Bitcoin, you want to get more of it. So that's one direction where there's always demand. And the goal here is offer good products, interesting things that are secure. And then there's everything else with like payments or like microloans, borrowing stuff against Bitcoin, building more exotic things, and actually just building also very simple things like savings accounts, right? Making it super easy for you as a merchant to receive stable coins, but always just get Bitcoin on the side, diversify, without having to have 2 different wallets, without having to have 3 different kind of interfaces, but it's all within one thing. You don't have to worry. Just the UX becomes much more simple. Because as weird as it sounds, that's not the case today. You can do either Bitcoin or everything else. Mm-hmm. And now merging these two things just means that, again, you have so many more things that you can do. You make it more accessible. And then you have very exciting things like Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, which I generally think that's probably one of the most exciting use cases and the ones with the most potential. Creating a stable coin that is not just
wrapper, right? It's stable coins at the moment.
It is, but they're all backed by central dollar deposits, right?
Yeah.
DAI unfortunately didn't quite work out. And also, to be clear, DAI was using WBTC. WBTC, right, this biggest wrapped Bitcoin asset, grew because it was accepted as collateral for MakerDAO. But then it kind of, WBTC is centralized, and then MakerDAO added USDC as collateral. It kind of became a pretty central version of a decentralized stablecoin. But now with BitVM, with these technologies that are coming up, you can have these deposits that you put in Bitcoin. They can be really decentralized. Like, nobody can control them. Nobody can steal them. So you could, for the first time, create a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin, but use Bitcoin as collateral. So you're essentially taking out a zero-interest loan, oversimplified, right? You're minting in a stablecoin. And then you can, again, we can either use that in strategies. You can maybe use it for payments. Initially, people will not accept it. So you'll just swap it for another stablecoin and pay for that. But your risk exposure is to Bitcoin in that decentralized system. If Don, you're accepting only USDC, okay, I'll just swap in the second I'm actually paying you against like other stable coin, and you can accept USDC, but I actually manage my risk. And I think that is very, very powerful. And there is a lot of demand for it. We've seen many instances of smaller attempts that actually succeeded within the boundaries that they could succeed in, just because the tech wasn't ready. And Bitcoin was also just not quite there yet from a mental state and community state. And I think over the next 5 years, that will probably be one of the biggest killer use cases.
Yeah, man, that sounds amazing. I know I have heard stories in Australia of people who have utilized similar kinds of, borrowing strategies, but from centralized, just trying to not name any names, centralized entities where those entities have gone bankrupt, and because of their terms and conditions, have been able to claw back money that has been essentially staked. But because of their terms and conditions, their staking was seen as a gift. So when this particular company gave that money back to the original depositor, it was seen as a gift from them. So when they went bankrupt, creditors were able to come in and claw back money from users because of the centralized nature of that loan platform. And so, yeah, to be able to do that in a decentralized manner would kind of de-risk a whole heap of what's currently happening, and still being able to benefit from those strategies. Yeah, I think I said that in a way that doesn't. Yeah, I'm happy with that.
I think I know what you mean, but
you identify. Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing, right?
Yeah.
We've maybe just to kind of, I'm always a bit cautious to say like, oh, everything that's already here is centralized for Bitcoin and it's bad. That's not true, right? I honestly think many teams would prefer to use more secure decentralized solutions because it mitigates risk for them, right? It's much harder to get hacked. You can protect user funds. It was just not available. So when people say, oh, we're going to, see Coinbase's Bitcoin and wrap BTC by Bitcoin, these are bad things and we should remove them. No, that's not true. Like they would use a better solution. It just didn't exist yet. So I think it's a much more collaborative spirit that we have to take here, and we have to work with existing solutions and say like, look, this is more secure. Let's start working together. And eventually you'll be able to transition to a much more robust model, which reduces your risk profile, probably makes it easier in terms of regulations, because you can arguably say you don't custody the Bitcoin. And that just makes everybody happy. So I honestly think that there will be a lot of interest, and we see the interest in these new solutions, not just from DeFi and purely decentralized applications, but also from institutional providers that see this as just an upgrade to their security system.
Oh, yeah. Well, what about, how are you thinking about the potential for, say, governments who want to have just a stockpile of BTC, but then being able to maybe put that BTC to use in some, nothing's risk-free essentially, but in some ways that are helpful to them, maybe is the best way of saying it, de-risked in certain capacity. Are you thinking through that level, or are you just trying to build the foundation, build all the infrastructure, make it so that people can utilize it, and then get people to come in and build that application layer? Or are you thinking about that application layer specifically as well?
I mean, we actively work on these applications. So I mean, it does take a lot of resources and a lot of strength to balance both. But I'm of the strong conviction that if you're just building the tech layer without working the applications, you're going to build something nobody wants to use. Sure, we might build a bridge, but we'll make trade-offs and things that the business then says, look, this is useless to me. Like, great, it's secure, but I can't use it. So we actually do work with applications. I mean, we're very far away from even the big banks. Like, I mean, we've talked with the ETF issuers. They're aware of BitVM, right? Some of them have written articles about it, but they're just not there yet, right? I mean, putting user funds into strategies. I mean, they're like at a stage where maybe we can do ETH staking, maybe, right? So it's like still, it's going to take time. But again, on the other hand, I think it's usually gradually and then suddenly, right? Staking, it becomes available. And then the first one tries to do DeFi in a very de-risked manner. And then more people start doing that. And then eventually governments can tap into these things. I think this will take a long time, obviously. But then again, you've seen how long it took Bitcoin to go from this is bad and it's bad for the environment and like all the banks are essentially funding these campaigns to, oh, I'm going to sell this to a grandma now as an ETF. Yeah. So this happened suddenly. So I do believe that in the next 5 to 10 years, we will certainly see this materialize. And whether governments will again care about, having decentralization, I don't know. Will they care about having secure custody of the Bitcoin? Certainly. And again, that's where I see this technology just evolving. It's available for products, it's available for DeFi, but it's also available for governments if they want to have better custody models and just de-risk how they store the Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. ETFs are great, but I'm also on the more cautious side of I guess, the community where I'd rather see more Bitcoin in DeFi than in ETFs. And that's personally our goal. That's the kind of target. Get more Bitcoin into DeFi in a secure manner than is locked in ETFs. It's an ambitious one, but in my opinion, if ETFs are good, more distribution, more users, but it shouldn't stop there, because if all these users have to go to the bank and to ask if they can use Bitcoin, then it's not Bitcoin anymore.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't just be happy with plugging Bitcoin into the old financial system. It's a good step. You can't expect 0 to 1 hyper Bitcoinization and people just switching to Bitcoin and dropping the dollar. Yeah, I don't think we want to see that happening either. And that comes with consequences. There'll be a reason for this to happen, and we probably don't want that. So sure. You have to work in parallel and build a system that is able to onboard users, and then just be an alternative. And then politics will be politics. That's not my kind of business. So we focus on products and tech, and then eventually I do believe that if there's good products, good distribution, and people will gradually adopt it.
Yeah, man. Let's say if someone wants to build in Bitcoin or find out more about what you're doing, if you're scratching an itch that they have, or they haven't even heard about the fact that Bitcoin is really opening up in this kind of way, how can they find you online or find out more about what you're doing?
So, obviously our website is the place where we have most of the information. It's gobob.xyz. And then obviously we're always easy to find on Twitter, and very happy to talk to anyone who's interested to learn more about BitVM, learn more about Bitcoin L2s, or if you actually want to start working and building these products, whether it is imminent or also just thinking for the long-term future. Our goal is to learn actually from businesses and understand what the needs are, what are the demands, so we can then build the necessary tech and products to, meet the needs and actually increase Bitcoin's utility.
Good on you. Well, great to have you on the show. And man, I hope to have you back at some stage later in the year to hear about your progress and how it's all going, and again, how people can be involved as well. But man, all the best in what you're doing. I think it's, obviously, I think it's going to be really fantastic to see. And I know that, when you mentioned your 10 years of EVM, or at least Ethereum, I thought, that can't be right. But it is actually, this year is going to be 10 years, which it can't be true. We're getting old. But Bitcoin, even 20-year anniversary coming around the corner as well. So, man, my hope is that all of these things are, well rolled out by the time Bitcoin turns 20, and hopefully the stuff you're doing at the moment will really help lay that foundation. So good on you. Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Off-Chain. We love bringing you great guests like Alexei, and hope we have inspired you to think more about Web3, about technology, about the future, even about building on Bitcoin. As always, like, subscribe, or better yet, share this episode with a friend. Help us spread the word, and join us again next week for another great episode of Off-Chain. Till then, take care.